Here. All right, so we're recording now. So we go. Action. Great. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out, and a special thank you to Darlene Gering, joining us tonight for a discussion about just general things related to sustainability in business, but specifically this whole new area of the blue economy, and a specific example of a really neat project and new business innovation that Darlene is charging forth with and heading up right here in British Columbia. So first and foremost, I'd like to just introduce everybody to Darlene Gering. So Darlene, how long have you and I known each other? A couple of years now?
Yeah, a few years since before the pandemic, because we met.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, before pandemic.
Yes.
This time warp.
Yeah.
So I met Darlene originally just through kind of connections of people I've been working with, and I was instantly impressed with Darlene's background in business and leadership, but interest, which is rare, really, not background in business, but profound interest in sustainability and the social component of business, like the social impact of what business can have. That really struck me right away, and it hasn't been a surprise to see all the amazing things that she's done since I've known her, and then of course that she has done in the past. So Darlene, maybe if you just want to give a brief background of where you're coming from, how you got into this area, and the participants, the people that we have here today, are a mix of people that are currently studying towards their master's degree at Royal Roads University. Some folks are taking studies that are focused more on environmental management tools and methods, and others are focused more on environmental accounting, so more economic stuff. And then we also have undergraduate students who are doing sustainable development studies. And then we have just the general network. So some people, I don't know if I recognize anybody that's just a former student or colleague or whatever who's interested in this stuff. So maybe give an idea of who you are, what your background is, and how you kind of migrated into this space.
Great, sure. Thanks, David. And yes, it's been great knowing you, and thanks for this opportunity. I appreciate being here and being able to lend a voice to sustainability, which is such an important topic and near and dear to my heart, as well as social impact. So my background's business. I come from a business background at York University and worked in the corporate world, and then went down and spent some time in Costa Rica, and then ended up here on the West Coast. And absolutely love it here. All the, forest and mountains and ocean. It's just the great thing, great place to be. So I guess my journey into sustainability and social impact really started when I was CEO at the Burnaby Board of Trade. So about 15 years ago, back in 2007, I started there in 2005, and then we actually implemented the first triple bottom line Board of Trade or Chamber of Commerce. For those of you that don't know, actually Board of Trade and Chamber of Commerce are the same thing. There's a few thousand of, every city has one, and township, etc. So the first triple bottom line went in all of Canada, and we actually tripled our membership in 3.5 years based on those values. We actually had 30% of our membership coming from Vancouver because people were attracted to that value proposition, and we are very genuine. It wasn't just a marketing ploy. We were very genuine. I started an environmental sustainability committee, and back then, remember, this was not mainstream. It's gone mainstream finally. I'm happy to say only in the last couple of years, and really since the pandemic, and we've been hit by climate change. But back then, people talked about corporate social responsibility and, sustainability. They were starting to talk a little, but really not at all. It really wasn't on the mainstream. It wasn't being discussed in business circles, except if you were in, green businesses. So it was quite a new thing, as they say, in mainstream business back then. And so it was a great journey. As I say, started environmental sustainability committee. So it started social development committee, in line with the triple bottom line that we were actually going to engage members directly in social issues. And, started a pledge, which after I left the Burnaby Board of Trade went on to win a World Chamber Congress Award, actually, in terms of what businesses were going to do to pledge in terms of reducing their carbon footprint. And in the area of social impact, worked as determined by the members in a list of social issues and homelessness, immigrant employment integration, and early childhood development were the three top that they picked. And then I lobbied in policy because that's part of the platform as a Chamber Board of Trade. For example, for a national homelessness strategy back in 2009, back again when business was not really engaged very much in this area, and also for early childhood development and national child care programs. So that was the beginning. And then since then, I really fell in love with the area in terms of purpose-based business. Fundamentally in my heart, I believe every business should be a social enterprise. We need businesses that really care about the planet and people and being more inclusive and equitable. So since then, I've worked in the area of sustainability and social impact, running a few different things. A consulting firm, I ran a social enterprise that helped basically single moms escaping violence in terms of returning to work, but not just minimum wage jobs, actually getting into office jobs. And it was through a social enterprise and running workshops and as I say, actually doing placements in sort of white collar jobs to integrate them into that realm and area of opportunity. And then I actually worked at Octaform, which is a global company that does tanks and great big tanks in terms of biogas, aquaculture, those types of things, and started the global Women in Biogas, because when I was working there and I was actually leading the company for the owner, it was rare that I would actually run into a woman. And this is only a couple of years ago. I just actually left that company in April. So we're not talking, a long time ago. And so through the World Biogas Association in London, England, who's also run by Charlotte Morton, a visionary and a lawyer and a leader in biogas. I proposed the idea, and as I say, started the global Women in Biogas network. And then I've left there and am now leading in the startup of Kelp Island and Seabrick. So that's my journey.
That's pretty amazing. A lot of that I'd heard, like I've known of many of the things, but there's certain things that you mentioned that I wasn't aware of, like in terms of the early work that you did. And I remember back in 2005, between 2005 and 2010 is when I started to get into the sustainability and business stuff, whereas before it just mostly been science. And you're right, like at that time, CSR was this kind of like just three letters that people knocked around all the time: CSR and our plan and our report. And it has taken a while, I think, for organizations to really kind of fundamentally commit and make progress with deeper levels of engagement. Now, in terms of your journey and your interest in this, have there been specific like instances, or you've mentioned that, for instance, the Women in Biogas initiative. I mean, I presume that your motivation to do that was like after the 25th or 30th meeting that you'd had amongst corporate leaders in that sector, and realizing that once again you were the only woman sitting at the table making these discussions. Are there others, were there other kind of inflection points for you along this in the last 15-20 years that kind of like made you say, look, I really need to commit myself to do this, right?
Yeah, I guess there was, in terms of, I would say working in the area of immigrant employment, at the Board of Trade, and obviously realizing like, our stats here, in Richmond, we have 65%, foreign born, Burnaby's 57% foreign born, Vancouver's probably up around, 50%. So, the majority of our people here are actually foreign born. They're not actually, meaning they're not born in Canada, right? They're born outside of Canada. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they struggle so much as professionals, internationally trained professionals, and we're not just talking about the doctors, driving the taxis, but people in a whole plethora of different backgrounds, not able and just working survivor jobs, in restaurants and, just not utilizing their skills at all. Yeah, I did actually, because I started, it was called Biz Impact. It was actually a systems facilitation firm with a couple of other consultants to say, can large business really take a deep look, do a deep dive into the root causes of why we have these issues, and kind of go through, a process to really analyze and look at this. And so, over sort of a 12 to 18-month period, this was, doing, large intensive research and engaging corporate minds in this as well, and looking at these issues. So yeah, that was one. And the whole area of employment, and, and now, we talk about equity and inclusion again. Finally, we're talking about it, right? I mean, it's taken this long. And before, it was, when I was talking about it, 15 years ago, people would say, oh yeah, okay, that, but now, I mean, everywhere you hear about, just like you hear about sustainability, and we've got to reduce our GHGs and look at climate. Now, equity and inclusion, it kind of takes a crisis before it seems the business community and the world in general sort of looks at it and says, oh, we have a problem here, and we have to do something about it. So that, yeah, those types of issues. And I guess I see them as all very interrelated. In terms of how we do things, you can't sort of just silo them off and have one. And I mean, they are very, very much interrelated. It's as probably all of being in this area, it is the most vulnerable populations who are most disproportionately affected, right, by climate change, right? The most marginalized, they don't have the options. And so, when we're looking at solutions, we really have to look at how we bring these things together. And that's finally starting to be part of the conversations, I'm happy to say.
And so that's a great segue into, what you're specifically working on now. So you are now, as of 2 months now, is it? Or
yeah, May 1st. Yeah.
New running the helm of a really interesting new hybrid model, I would say, of between a not-for-profit, I guess Kelp Island is, and a not-for-profit organization.
Actually, Kelp Island is a social enterprise, and Seabrick is actually, yeah.
Oh, Seabrick, okay, but it's a combined model where you have one organization achieving a certain objective, and then the other one achieving a similar objective that's complementary, related to the other. So it's Kelp Island and Seabrick, which is essentially looking at developing or seeking to develop the blue economy or marine-based economy through kelp harvesting, and then products that are associated with that. So maybe if you want to give just a description or an overview of what you're doing with these, and what these two initiatives are, new organizations are, and what you're seeking to do.
Sure, absolutely. So I was invited into this, yes, by John Richardson, who is the founder and inventor of Seabrick. And it's actually a brilliant, revolutionary new way of utilizing kelp. And you're probably all very familiar with the huge benefits of kelp in terms of a building product. And I guess what sparked my interest is in the last, having run Octaform, and that is in the construction sector. So we actually built the tanks, right? The aquaculture tanks, the biogas tanks. So I learned all about the field of construction, and construction, represents 38% of our greenhouse gas emissions, and really shocking to most people that it's actually that high, because people seem to think, that, oh, these green building projects really get a lot of media attention, and that maybe it's more prolific than it is. And maybe you're all aware of this, but I would say the general population, when I say that stat, and I've used that a lot, having to say how to get people's attention, it's using the numbers. I've used that, and just a little segue here, since I lobbied for homeless. It was very simple when I lobbied. I had to get 2/3 of all these, sort of older white-haired, what does homelessness have to do with business? And saying, well, it actually costs 3 times as much to keep someone on the street, with all the associated costs of policing and emergency room, paramedics, et cetera, than actually to provide them with supportive housing. So, that simple, using numbers works really well. And so I find in the people have no idea. Everybody thinks about energy, and of course, fossil fuels. We do have to get ourselves off and wean ourselves off fossil fuels. But the construction sector is the largest sector in the world. It's everywhere. It's everywhere we build, and we continue to have to build more because of the destruction that's going on with climate change. And so the Seabrick is actually using kelp biomass. And the first product is going to be a floating brick, which actually can be used in marine infrastructure. So breakwaters and all sorts of different things. But we envision actually that there'll be many more kelp-based building products. And this is relatively new. Well, it's actually very new. There's really not people doing this. There's one application of a hardwood, sort of a veneer paneling that's being done. That's also very new in the Netherlands. And then there's another Mexican who we've had talks with, who's actually using sargassum from the, washing up on the seashores, et cetera, and making sargo blocks out of, kind of like a cinder block. But otherwise, really, kelp is not being used anywhere that we've discovered in all our research as a building product. And when I look at what can we use, being completely regenerative is so important. Using a product that actually, is not, virtually is, there's no carbon. I mean, it's a carbon sink. And so it's just such a fantastic idea. And so that's Seabrick. And then Kelp Island, the idea behind Kelp Island as a social enterprise is actually to address the whole equity and social impact. So here in Canada, we have all our Indigenous communities who are on, a lot of coastal communities, and they've been, very adversely affected by climate change with their fish stocks declining, and have many empty fish plants that they built that are just sitting there empty and not being able to use them. And so kelp is just a wonderful product. They've been harvesting it for thousands of years for them to actually use and create an integrated supply chain that is actually led and owned by them. So Kelp Island is actually just helping in terms of the commercialization, as a consultant in leading projects, and to get federal government funding and to connect them with the markets. And we actually already have Water Studio actually, who does all the latest, well, they've been since 2003 actually floating structures all over the world. They're doing a huge floating city actually in the Maldives, and we had Koen Althaus, who is the founder of it, who's very excited because they are building with steel, concrete, and styrofoam, which of course, as you know, is very, very highly carbon intensive. And he is just, said, as soon as you can get me, Seabricks, I will use that in terms of our building products. He was so excited about the fact. So really in the construction area, there are some products, but there's not that many, and they're certainly not being used in any kind of mass quantity. And, a lot of the alternatives, we don't want to cut down more trees, and so concrete is as you know, has got 8 or 9% of our global GHGs. But really, what are some very carbon neutral alternatives? And kelp is just an amazing resource that we can use. And so this is whole bring together the social impact of having an Indigenous-led industry. And we're partnering with Indigenous Works, who is a national organization, and looking at how can we include all three coasts. Canada is the largest coastline in the world, and this is such a great resource for us to use in terms of building products. So to me, it's such an exciting initiative to be able to have an Indigenous-led industry, have the social impact, and combine that with a tremendous environmental impact that we have. Because in the construction sector as well, there's different products, but really, we have to look at where they're sourced. So if they're still sourced, using magnesium, using some other kind of alternative product that, you have to either get from mining or some other source, supply chain source that is not, carbon neutral, then, what really is the impact of that? Maybe it's better, it's not as bad, but it's still not where we have to be in terms of solving our climate crisis.
That's great. That's excellent. So in terms of the focus of, the focus of the overall initiative, Seabrick is going to be focused on the development of the products, correct?
Yes,
So the
yes, correct.
methodologies,
Yes,
technology, and all that kind of
yes.
stuff. And you'll
Mhm.
be licensing that
Yes,
knowledge to communities so that they can start up facilities or something like that, correct?
yes, yes, exactly.
And then Kelp Island is focused on establishing basically like farms for producing the kelp, correct?
No, actually, it's the commercialization. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, because we're actually looking at, for example, we're in discussions with the health sick community who's been harvesting. They've been here for 11,000 years, and they've been
Mm,
harvesting for thousands of years,
mm,
and their fish plant is shut down.
mhm.
So it's actually saying instead of just selling the raw kelp to other, there's some industries starting up on Vancouver Island that are, in the food industry, et cetera, and they would only get, 70 cents a pound or something for
Mm,
taking and selling it. How can we actually create an integrated supply chain where they're actually taking and manufacturing,
mm,
the sea bricks and other building products,
mhm.
and then they actually would own that piece as well, and we would help in the commercialization to find the buyers, such as this water studio that we've already found who says as
Mm.
fast as you can produce them, I'll buy them. And
Right.
so it's Kelp Island is supporting in terms of generally going after helping to go after federal funding to get
Mhm.
them established to repurpose their plants and
Right.
do capacity building, etc. So in that project management stage, and then in the commercialization,
I see.
to actually sell it, as I say, and then they retain so much more value
Mm,
rather than just being the harvester. They
mm.
actually get the benefit from producing and manufacturing as well, and owning that manufacturing facility.
Okay. And so the Kelp Island, then I'm trying to kind of position this for some of the folks that are studying environmental management tools. Like you're creating this brand, so kind of like Forest Stewardship Council timber, right? If you go to the store and get FSC certified photocopier paper, for instance, that that's coming from a source that has, put in some pretty good environmental oversights and so forth. So Kelp Island essentially could also serve as an eco label in terms of the branding for potential buyers like this group that is doing construction elsewhere in the world. So there's that component of the operation, like kind of putting all these social and environmental metrics and standards and so forth under this one umbrella. So you're giving capacity and you're training people and you're giving them access to the market, but you're also kind of qualifying the whole supply chain by saying, look, this is legit. This is like people are benefiting and so forth.
Yes, because I find as well, and not just I guess in construction that it does exist, and even with some large companies, the greenwashing that goes on. There's a lot. So you're absolutely right to set the standards and be able to certify that this is actually happening. This is Indigenous led and owned. They're meeting all the sustainability because we work with their marine protection plans, which they have. So to ensure the sustainability element is actually there, and so that's really important. So absolutely, it's kind of certifying that the brand is valid.
And so what have been some of the challenges at the outset of starting this? I mean, it all sounds great and it is great, but did you have some problems convincing people of the viability of kelp as a product? Did you have, where are some kind of barriers that you encountered thus far?
I guess the barriers when you're creating a new market
Yeah.
essentially, right? So when you're creating a new market, people they love the idea. When they hear it, they all love it,
Mhm.
but it's sort of like it's just like you trying to say, well, how does Kelp Island really fit when you're creating a new market,
Mhm.
and a new entity that actually you can't say, well, it's like X, because
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's already there.
Mhm.
um Sometimes it's hard for people to relate and think about, well, okay, how do we, and especially with government, they like to have everything sort of pigeonholed. So in terms of, oh yes, we love this idea, it ticks blue economy, green economy,
Mhm.
indigenous, all these things, but then where does it land? Because it's sort of it's in the middle of all of these, as opposed to just being in one certain specific area.
Mhm.
So I would say that is a bit of a challenge, is because it's new. I mean, our envision is let's create a whole kelp economy. Let's have Canada as a leader.
Mhm.
Kelp is such a rich, renewable, regenerative resource for Canada,
Mhm.
to be a leader and moving away from our other, of course, from fossil fuels, but even from, some of the wood-based products, right? That, we don't want to be cutting down our forests
Mhm.
anymore.
Mhm.
So we can use these types of products to be a replacement.
Mhm. Excellent. And in terms of the social and environmental impacts, I know you and I have talked about this, but do you foresee there being like kind of you establishing a set of KPIs, like saying like our greenhouse gas emissions reduction per unit? Like, do you foresee like kind of something like that going forward?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Taking advantage, of course, of the, carbon credit market, right? And that sort of thing. Absolutely. Yes. We definitely want to participate in that and quantifying, yeah, what exactly is the carbon capture? And is this in fact is it carbon neutral? I mean, when you take a manufacturing process, et cetera, we want to be as green as possible.
Mhm.
So, if the plant can use renewable energy, how much can we actually make it, as I say, potentially, carbon neutral?
Mhm. And on the social side of things, where do you see like, because I mean, you've got a strong background in social impact of business, like you've been exposed to a lot of different types of social impact of business, whether it be from immigrants to homeless, to gender empowerment, across the board. With this new initiative, what do you think are the key, like what gets you excited about the social impact of this initiative? Are there certain aspects of it, like the First Nations component, or the transformation, economic transformation part of it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, because I definitely also think in terms of, there's so many, obviously it's a huge growing area, the whole green business area. But even as I say in biogas, which of course is part of that, and just my saying, it was predominantly, white males, no offense, but right? It's the same players in the room, right? And that's very much the case in a lot of green businesses, that it's actually not looking at, or it's not taking into account those, disenfranchised or marginalized populations. And so that to me is really exciting. As
Mm.
I say, if we can actually do that, and even, let's start in Canada and do it with our Indigenous communities, but then let's, even globally,
Mhm.
in small island developing states, right, with marginalized communities that there have been losing, their economic viability due to, the impacts of climate change, et cetera.
Mhm.
And so how can we also empower them in
Mhm.
terms of, ownership models, right? Because they're actually owning, it's not some, Western company that's coming and owning it and they get to work in it, right? They actually would be owners in it, with our model.
It's funny you should mention the white male, as a white male, but no,
Yeah, sorry.
but I mean, you got me to think, because I've been in green business for a while now, right? And as an entrepreneur, and as I think about that just now, it's just something I just thought about. I've thought about it, but not in specific terms, is the amount of times that I've gone into any meeting whatsoever in the green business, and it's not a white male running the show. I can count on my hand of like
Yeah.
thousands of meetings, thousands of,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I'm thinking why that is. And I have a theory. I mean, this is just my quick working hypothesis, is that, I mean, it's always been green business is great. Everybody loves it, even now, although it's got more heat behind it now because there's more interest in it. But even back in the day, everybody loved it, like solar and so forth, 15, 10, 20 years ago. Um, but I think one of the things was it has always been like a higher risk proposition, like uh, it seems as though, yeah, there's a green business that we want to start up, but in order to attract capital for those business or the attention of suppliers, uh, I'd say perversely, like the perverse logic behind it is, so this is high risk. I want to minimize my risk as much as possible. And therefore, I think that's part of the reason why you've seen a lot of this. Oh, he's former CEO of this big corporate giant has come into the CEO of this new eco startup, and therefore like it's going to work, right? I think
Yeah.
that may have been part of it. I don't know. What are your thoughts on why that is?
I absolutely agree. And this is why we never change as far as the inclusion and the equity,
Yeah.
and oh, you could have the token person, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, the token person that's there, on the board or whatever, right?
Mm.
Or, oh, we've hired, but oh, it's maybe our marketing person. It's not someone actually in a decision making or a leadership position, right? As, female or someone that's, from a racialized group, right? But yeah, it's actually yeah, we repeat these same cycles, and so we're not gonna solve this unless we actually do this radical shift and transformation. And and even in the marine industry, when I look at there's actually already a women in marine group Facebook group. I didn't have to start it. But
Okay.
you look at I forget the association, but there's an association in Victoria that's the Marine Association.
Mhm.
Their board is all men. There's not a single woman on that board,
Mm.
right? And so we're like right now. I mean, I'm talking, and yeah, I wonder. I don't know, David. I guess I could ask you this question. Like, I wonder. I sometimes think, do men look around and they're just so used to it? And I don't say that in a negative or pejorative way, but you're just so used to it that you don't really question it. Like it's kind of like, oh, that's the way it is. Whereas I'm so used to always being the only woman. It doesn't bother me. I mean, I've been decades, right? Because I've been in leadership for a long time. And
Yeah.
so, um, you know, uh, I'm so used to it. Yeah, as I say, it doesn't bother me at all. But I just wonder, and I actually acknowledge, because our women in Biogas group, we had one male who was there.
Yeah.
And I would always say to him, he was a young guy. I said, how do you feel? Are you feeling, awkward or what? He took it all in stride, right? He was really good about it. And obviously he joined. But yeah, I just wonder, like, from your perspective, do you look around and say, gee, there's not really, any women, or there's not people that are people of color, or, do you, like to kind of, question those things?
Well, it's a good point, and I guess my perspective is a little, I wouldn't say it's radically different, but it's a bit different. Like I grew up, my mother was a very full-on kind of leadership, YWCA Women of Distinction Award, like let's go like change the world type of person. So, which is good. And I just kind of, that was normal to me. I grew up like, okay, yeah, whatever. I mean, that's just, women do whatever they want is how I was raised, and by example. So, um, and so my aunt was the same way. Like she was a travel agent back in the 70s when no women were traveling to, developing countries and stuff like this. So me personally, I never really, I don't know. I kind of wondered why it was such a big deal when women who I worked with, I've had many female CEO clients and colleagues who kick ass. And when they kick ass, people are like, oh my God, look at what she's doing. And I'm and like, what's your
Yeah.
point? That's my big, what is my big surprise moment is like, what's your point, man? Like, that's normal to me. Like, get with the program. And so I find it strange. I guess the strangest thing is I find when I do get in those situations where I go to a board meeting or with a bunch of business folks, and it's mostly guys. Like then I'm a little surprised. I'm like, oh, I don't understand what this is all about. This is kind of old school. That's the way I see it. So there's that. And then the other thing, I'll share this story, which is from as of 6 years ago, I think it was. It was at the Montreal Summit, the Summit of the Americas conference, the Economic Summit, which happens in Montreal. I think it's every 2 years. They just had it like a week or so ago. And I went to one of these side meetings that they had. They have like all the big talks, and they have these series of side meetings on thematic areas. And the one was on women in business. And Christine Lagarde, who then and still is, I believe, is the head of the IMF,
Yeah.
she was one of the speakers there. And she's like a heavy, like she's like talk about power woman, right? Like killing it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so they had a panel of women talking about these issues. And I thought, there's all these things to go to, like 4 at the same time. I said, I'm going to go to this. Like, well, why not? I went in there, and it was me and 3 other guys in a room full of like 100 or maybe 75 to 100 women executives watching this stuff. And then they talked about the issues about the number of board representation, all the key things that are plaguing that area. But then there was a part which they said, well, this has just got to change. And I just want to recognize the men that are here. Like, there's 3 of us. We just want to recognize you and honor you guys for coming here and, participating in this forum. And it was weird because, my impression was I felt insecure about that, because it was like, oh, thank you for coming. And that's how it sounded. And it came across to me. And I was like, I didn't say anything, but what I was thinking was this: I almost did stand up and say, you don't need to thank me. Like, this isn't charity. 85%, like 75% of the people that work with me as team members are women. So I want to understand what their issues are. I'm here because this is an issue that I think is important and is relevant to my business. I'm not here for tokenism. I'm here to, you know what I mean? And that's how I felt was kind of weird. A, that there weren't more guys there, and B, that the guys that were there, they felt they needed to be like elevated and thanks for engaging and so forth. And that was kind of a weird situation.
You know what that probably is though, David, is because, me being, sometimes, a lot of times the only woman, or, maybe, the only woman, or maybe there's only a couple of us or whatever. And that's kind of the reverse.
Yeah.
Never get recognized.
Okay.
Right. Like, I've never been to a meeting where that's happened, actually, where it's like, oh, okay, we'd like to thank you, Darlene, for coming as, one of the only women in this room.
Yeah.
It never happens, right? Like, so, it's just like me recognizing, this fellow, who is the only one in our Women in Biogas, right? That probably, I did it because I think it's brave and everything else. And probably she was thinking the same thing. And also because we as women wish, wow, how come that can't be pointed out? Or, that doesn't happen to us, right? When we're the only woman, or there's only a couple of us, it doesn't happen, right? Like, you think about it. Think of when you've been to a thing and there's been does everyone ever say, oh, stand up and thank you for being the only woman? It never happens, right?
Yeah, I guess to counterpoint you, like, I would never do that, because I don't know if I say never, but I would hesitate to do that as a guy. Say, okay, I want to thank for the women. Like, if I weren't in that situation, it were like a board meeting or whatever, I just want to recognize and thank. I would feel nervous about doing that, and cautious for it being interpreted as tokenism, like, thank you for coming as the woman. That's where I would feel insecure about that, for it coming across in that way, as opposed to how it should come across to say, look, we really respect you and are thankful that you don't feel like you feel welcome here. Like, that's how I would want it to feel.
Yeah, I guess, that's how I said it to the men. Sorry, I didn't mean it in terms of saying it's tokenism or whatever. I mean, when I, acknowledged the fellow that was in the Women in Biogas, I thanked him and said, I'm glad you feel welcome. I'm glad you feel comfortable being part of this, that kind of thing. So maybe just to clarify that point of how it's done.
So when that happened to me, though, it wasn't done that way. It was
right. Okay.
It was like, thank you for showing up. Like, thank you for giving us your time. It was, you know what I mean? Like, there's a difference between how you did that and how it was came to me. And my response was like, look, this is normal. I'd like this should be normal. Like, let's make it normal, right? Let's find a way to make this like not an exception, but the norm, that half the people here should be guys, right?
Yeah.
Issues that we should be understanding and confronting and dealing with. Anyway. Cool. I'm glad we got into this discussion. What typically happens in these things.
But it's important, as you see in this, because that's right in the green business today. And, you're absolutely right, of course, because the percentages of, women funded, businesses is still pitifully low, right? Like, it's, 95% of VCs, right? Businesses are, it's fun. They're funding males, right? So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I also see that I think I'm optimistic that things will be a lot different 10, 15 years from now, because when I see students, frankly speaking, a lot of the women are doing a lot better than on average than the guys, like just the engagement, the effort, the motivation, and so forth. So I think we will see a different reality in even 5 to 10 years. but there's still a lot of things that need to occur and a lot of work that needs to be done. I'm particularly interested in the component of Seabrick and Kelp Island, in which you're going to have First Nations communities running the show, like running the business. And how have you started to kind of start with those discussions? Because this can obviously be a tricky situation in the current context of decolonialization or addressing colonialization and trying to move towards a path towards reconciliation. So how has that played out thus far?
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, this I guess comes a point, and I wanted to make this point as well, as about the how. So in our whole journey to sustainability, it's not just the what we're doing, it's how we're doing it, and how we're doing it has got to be in this more inclusive, equitable way, and not just to voice or be paid lip service, but to actually, through ownership models, give ownership. It's the only way that money is going to shift, right? That's the only way they're actually going to have economic empowerment. And in terms of the whole, absolutely going in, it's not going in and telling them you should do it in this way and that way and the next way, as the white, expert, right? I mean, I guess in this case, it's interesting because when I presented to them in the health sec, I actually felt which is matriarchal. I mean, they've got, men on the council as well, but it's a female chief, and a lot of women on their council, in fact, more women than males. And but I actually felt it was an advantage being a white woman as opposed to a white male, because of the history.
Right.
And I was very warmly embraced. But I was actually presenting to the harvesters and people, so it was mostly male. The economic development person, the head of their economic development, was a female, but all the harvesters were men. But I was very warmly embraced, and it's coming in and saying, here's an idea, or here's what we think, but really being inviting in their perspective and their knowledge. And it's not going and saying we know best or we're the experts. It's sort of, we have an idea, or this is sort of what we understand from research and various different things, but making it in terms of a level playing field, and very much inviting their input, and not telling, but actually more a sharing, sharing of information, and really being very inclusive in terms of how to go about it, right? It's not imposing something on them or trying to sell them on an idea. It's more sharing information and then welcoming feedback.
And from what I understand, the HealthSec have a fair degree of capacity already in terms of natural resource business. They have harvesting fisheries has been active for a very, very long time, both kind of traditional indigenous fisheries and then commercial fishing as well. So having that kind of base level of business understanding and experience, has that been helpful with approaching them with this idea?
Oh, absolutely, yes, because they immediately, understand sort of the whole market opportunity and potential of what kelp can actually bring to them, and really also in terms of the integrated supply chain, because when they look at, we're going to harvest, right, all of this kelp, they have 83 million pounds of kelp actually from a study that was done in about 2007 in their territory, area 7. And so when they look at it, what are our options? Well, of course, it makes much more sense to have an integrated supply chain and be able to benefit their community, benefit, and their nation to benefit from being able to manufacture an actual product rather than just selling, a resource to somebody else who's then going to take the lion's share, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so at the current stage, you're still kind of, I wouldn't say startup phase necessarily, but you're kind of moving, you've already got kind of interested clients and so forth. Like what's your time frame? Like where do you say from now to the next year to 5 years to 10 years, where do you see this? How do you see things evolving?
Yeah, so we have to go through and actually do we've got the product designs, we have to do the product development piece, which we're actually in stages talking with UBC and also with Indigenous Works and INSERC and various organizations about potential partnerships to do that. I don't anticipate that's going to be a problem that will flow forward. I would like to see this, in terms of the longer term, that we're actually building and helping develop and support an Indigenous-led and owned kelp economy in Canada, where these products can actually be exported, for these types of projects that are being used, and then other kelp-based building products, and that, Canada can actually be a leader in this type of industry, just like it's been in forestry, oil and gas, those natural resources. Let's use our natural resource of kelp. And harvesting kelp, and then also there's the whole aspect of farming. There is, farming kelp operations that are starting as well, but both of those in a very sustainable manner, to replace those other industries, for jobs, and developing, and as I say, the manufacturing piece as well. So we're not just exporting, raw resources.
Excellent. And so, given that we've talked about the industry itself and your initiative itself, and this kind of new and emerging opportunity for Canada as well as for specific communities and coastal areas, how do you think, like, just to go full circle, how do you think that what you're doing can impact? What are some of the broader challenges in business right now that exist with respect to sustainability and the status quo? And how do you think what you're doing can kind of like, impact that and shake things up a bit?
Well, what I learned being in the construction sector, and I'm sure this is true with other green products, is price does matter. People want to do the right thing, but if you're not actually competitively priced, if it's far more expensive, then it's very hard to get people to switch. I don't care if that's business to consumer or B2B, unless you're actually price competitive, it's difficult. So I would say to come up with a product that actually is, price competitive, with current building practices. And so something that is very compelling, and because in construction, I mean, as I say in other industries as well, but construction's it's always about the price, what's the price, and it's price sensitive. So we have to keep that in mind in terms of, having a very simple manufacturing process and making sure that it is price competitive. And so that it is actually easy to switch then, from traditional using concrete, steel, all the traditional building products that are currently used, because that's really, really important. And then to actually measure, to your point, David, to actually measure what is the carbon, sequestration that we're able to attain, what are the inputs, how can we make the whole process as green as possible? So, using renewables and things, in terms of the plants, the manufacturing plant, and how can we make that process, a very low carbon process.
Awesome. So, I mean, basically like being like a concrete example of what is possible in this new blue-green economy, because it's kind of a blue-green / hybrid in a way.
Yes.
So in terms of your personal journey, I mean, some of the folks here are, engaged in traditional sectors, so oil and gas or whatever, some of the graduate students, and some are just kind of figuring it out, the undergraduates. What's your advice to people who are interested in this area and then want to kind of like chase their interests, like in terms of sustainability in business in this case, and also social inclusion?
Well, I would say to really do your homework, as to my point, I think there's a lot of greenwashing that's done. So when you're actually looking at companies, look at their whole supply chain, just like we're starting to do in the textile industry, right? I mean, look at the whole supply chain. What are the products, they're using? Where are they being manufactured? Are they coming from mining? What is the whole, from actually sourcing the materials to how they're being manufactured, and how are the people actually as well, in every one of those stages, not only what is the, GHG or carbon, impact, but also then how are people being treated, and, what are the ownership models? We have to start challenging these traditional kind of models, and we need it from all sides. I mean, I've done it, fortunately being in, leadership positions. And so I've been able to exert that influence. But even, when you're coming into businesses, and starting out, you can start questioning these things and suggesting alternative models, right? And asking why is this? If you're in a meeting and you're a white male, and there's no females, ask the question, hey, how come there's no other, either females or people of color, sitting around the table here? We have to start. I'll start asking those questions. And as I say, really do your research in terms of where the materials are sourced from, right from the raw material stage all the way through.
Excellent. No, I think we just had a tutorial session, like a live chat for one of the courses before this, in which it's at the course in environmental accounting. And right now what we're working on that course is comparing environmental accounting or sustainability accounting to traditional accounting, with the idea of walking away from, that unit or that kind of set of stuff, knowledge, and being able to go into the accountant's office at your company and say, look, I don't mean to bother you, and I'm really curious about what you're working on, but I noticed that we don't, in our accounting, we just cover this stuff. We don't look at these other things that, these environmental externalities. And why is that? Like, just ask the question. And having that knowledge in the language of the status quo is helpful in that regard, because you can say, look, I've noticed this. I've noticed in our governance that it's all white guys who are running this company, and I get it, but why is that? Like, why is that? And hopefully there'll be some sort of answer, or at least that can start a discussion about, potentially different ways of doing things, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So I'm gonna, we're at a 6:55, but I do like to have an opportunity for people to ask questions. So I'm going to open it up. Does anybody have any questions for Darlene about what they're working on? And I hope you do, because it's directly relevant to a lot of the things that we're working on. Don't be shy. We've got Elsa. Elsa, the floor is yours.
Hey, Darlene. Hi, it's Elsa.
Hi, Elsa.
Don't mean to always monopolize these, but I just hop in because I always got a couple of questions. So I have two questions for you. One is more technical. You had talked about your floating bricks as such, your kelp, being sort of an alternative or competitor to concrete. And I'm just interested in the materials testing side of things. So are they a standalone? You talked about potentially using them as some sort of riprap or break or something, but are they structurally sound to be able to load on top, and that goes to longevity and materials testing side? So that's the first question. Then you have another one.
Yeah. So yes, they are standalone. So they're actually about 50 centimeters. They're like a standalone brick. And the stage we're at actually is we've done the product design. We're actually at the point where we're looking at which institutions to partner with, and John, the founder, in terms of the actual material compositions. So what we anticipate is the interior of it is actually going to be done by steam explosion, very much like medium density fiberboard, of how that is actually compressed. And then the outside is going to be like a ceramic shell that floats and very hard and impermeable. But the additives that we would use for each of those would actually be 100% organic. And John, we've done research actually globally. There's some very interesting, additives that could be used, and the kelp that's used in different building products is actually very much stronger than concrete. We haven't done the testing yet, but actually in tests that have been done in other kelp related products, the testing actually shows that it's 2 to 5 times stronger than concrete. But definitely that's a part of the product development phase, is to do the testing. But as I say, testing with other kelp related products does show it's significantly stronger than concrete because of the fiber.
Yeah. Yep. This isn't my second question, but just Googling it, I'd say one of the barriers is you come across Minecraft, keeps coming up as like the game. So as soon as I Google the kelp and bricks, turns out it's something in the Minecraft video game. So there's a barrier for you. Anyways, my second. So I'm in David's Environmental 660, the management tools class, and kind of funny. So if somebody wanted to do a case study on you, your career's kind of ticked off all the 3 pillars of sustainable development, like economic, social, and environmental. So kind of fun there. My question to you, and same as a scientist and a business owner, did you fall into these things, or did you chart them, or do you just have your interest go all over the place? So kind of a personal question here. You know, how do you manage where you've gone with your career with all these interests? Have you charted it? Like your sort of feedback was do your homework, but has that applied to yourself as well?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I did my homework. I would say that yeah, I kind of fell into when I was at the Board of Trade. I had a good friend of mine who was a career counselor who actually, you know, told me I should apply for that job. I didn't really think I was the right person if that's what I wanted to do, because I had no experience or background in associations. I'd always worked in the private sector, and so anyways, yeah, I sort of fell into that. But then I guess, you know, it was at a point where it needed a complete revisioning. Unfortunately, my predecessor, you know, it hadn't been managed properly, and so it was an opportunity. And I've had these, you know, where I go into organizations, and I suppose I do this. I've always done this in my career, and going in with innovative ideas and ways to actually, you know, make them. Even back in the day, you know, I started my career, for example, in Dun & Bradstreet when, and I was quite naive. I didn't really know when I started there. It was kind of right out of business school, right? That they were being sued and, you know, all these things for unethical practices and etc. Like I had no idea. I was just like a green. So I didn't do my homework, right? But I actually, you know, did extremely well. They actually fired a guy who was 20 years older than me, middle-aged, and put me in charge of all the largest national accounts. And I sold the first commercial credit scoring model in the world, actually. And then I got the ear of like the presidents and everything else. And I made them actually do a whole transparent thing. I changed their whole pricing strategy. So I was bringing ethics into the whole organization. I had a quality team of improving the quality. I was the project champion for that. But as I say, they changed their whole pricing structure. And I was, you know, it was at my impetus to actually do that. And I had the ear of the president. So I would say I've more fallen into things than doing my research and charting my path. But then when I've been in those situations, I really used, I guess I've used the, you know, the power I had or the ability I had to really make changes in terms of making them more ethical and, you know, and then moving into sustainable, etc. So.
Well, super cool. Thanks. And I guess good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Same to you.
Thank you. Great questions, Elsa.
Yeah.
And other questions? Anybody else? Come on, let's hear it.
I have a question.
Yes, Teresa.
I'm sorry, I might have missed the beginning, but is the government supporting this in funding in any way?
We are, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just because I'm also in David's sustainable development class, but I'm also in an environmental law class, and I was just doing some research and came across the Guardian Network initiative. And I was curious if about the government support in this, if they're offering funding. It just seems like a perfect
Yes.
perfect
Yeah, we're in discussions right now actually to get that federal funding, and we've actually we have 3 ADMs, you know, assistant deputy ministers provincially who are also in BC very, very interested in funding this. So yes, absolutely, this is something that yeah, we don't see any issue. In fact, it's kind of which is the right organization. You know, I'm talking to the ocean, a super cluster as well. So there's many different pockets where, yeah, absolutely, we will be getting federal funding for this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The Guardian Network is actually a really good example and model because, you know, just a really excellent initiative that is producing great results. I think that we've talked about this before, Darlene, there's many, many different ways in which the federal and provincial governments could get involved with what you're doing for sure. I don't have any doubt whatsoever they'd be foolish not to engage with it.
Yeah, yeah, they're very strongly interested. I don't have doubt either. You know, yeah.
Yeah. Other questions? Good. So we're hitting an hour, so I don't want to, I know, Darlene, you got a ton on your plate, so I don't want to take too much of your time. Good. All right. Well, we'll keep it at that for tonight. I just want to thank you, Darlene, of course, for taking the time to talk to us and share your experience. I'm sure if you've got anybody has any further questions, feel free to kind of send them to me, and I can send them to Darlene and get some answers. Maybe even if you're interested in looking at their organization and focusing some of your studies on how they might do certain things, that could probably be free work is always helpful, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, welcome that for sure. Any ideas? Yes, any ideas you have, or any ideas that have been provoked, please do send them along to David, and I would love to hear them.
Well, and also talk to other folks at RRU, because I haven't really done that as much, but these are this type of initiatives are the things that RRU totally aligns with. Royal Roads University is like a right in line with this kind of thing. So I mean, I'm sure maybe there's some other folks, professors and or administrators or leaders at the university that would hear about this and say, hey, that's really cool. We need to kind of focus some of our research on this, or we need to kind of help make this happen. I think that would be worthwhile. So spread the word for sure. This is recorded and it's going to be available on YouTube afterwards. So you're all welcome to share the video once it's live, which will be tomorrow. But once again, Darlene, thank you very much for sharing what you're working on, and thank you very much for the work that you've been doing, you know, over your career, because it can be challenging shaking things up sometimes, and lonely as well. You know,
it's fun. I enjoy it.
Yeah,
you can probably tell.
Yeah, it's like, I don't think Darlene needs like support or consolation. It's like, no, I like to shake the boat.
Yeah, I love a good challenge. So
yeah, you know, and it needs to happen. And this is it. If there's one of the many takeaways from this conversation for those that are watching this either afterwards or currently, it's don't be afraid to like ask questions and shake things up. Things need to change. And even if they don't, like, even if it's a situation where you ask questions and nothing happens, if you don't ask those questions, then people just go stuck in the status quo all the time. Like, I find that all the time. Even in progressive organizations like the UN and stuff like this, there's just ways of doing things that they get accustomed to that, you know, need to be questioned on a periodic basis. So if any of you are ever in those situations where you scratch your head and say, well, I don't really understand why this is the way it is. I mean, don't have the, you know, there's no harm in asking questions. That's for sure, in my opinion. You know, like if you do it in the right way, I mean, no one's going to get mad at you for necessarily like saying, look, I'm just curious as to why this is the way it is. It just strikes me as strange. Like, can you please explain this? And that may in fact cause them just to say, hey, you know, I never even noticed this. Maybe we do need to re-examine this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I certainly do encourage you to do that. And you know what? It's been very beneficial in my career, as you can tell. So we need to shake things up, and yeah, it's good. It's good to ask the question. So thank you so much, David. Thanks. And thanks to all of you for your time. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed the opportunity, and I wish you all the best of luck in, you know, creating a more sustainable world.
Absolutely. And we look forward to seeing Seabricks at Home Depot when we go there next time.
Oh, yes. Okay.
I know you're going to get started. We're going to start seeing Kelp Island in the news and all this kind of stuff. It's one of those ones that I think, you know, you're on the cusp of something big. So you've got some fans here, and we're here to cheer you on. So
great.
Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll take care.
Thanks, David.